Hey everyone, and welcome back to our other quick little video about the Spires of Arak. This is one of the new zones in Warlords of Draenor, and Blizzard were nice enough to do an art craft on it. And it's actually kind of interesting because they talked a lot more about how zones and things like that are actually made. This is something that I guess not a great deal of people really know too much about, so this should actually be kind of informative for quite a few people. Still, also of course it's just nice to see the concepts for the zone. So in the video I'll talk about what they cover in the Artcraft post, how zones like this are actually made by the environmental artists, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of my concerns about the zone, because while I think it could be very cool, I think there are one or two little pitfalls about it. So first of all, the main concept of the zone was tall rocky spires jutting out of a dense forest, and in general that is what you see in a lot of the earlier concept art. It seems like it's a little bit more barren later on, I suppose. I'm not 100% sure what it's finally going to look like. We've seen one or two iterations of it in, say, the early alpha build, Datamind, not Datamind, use the sandbox server to find it. You can find that information on the internet if you want, but I can't exactly just, directly link you to it, because it's not legit. Like, Wowhead wouldn't do that, and they're pretty cool guys. Anyway, so, about the zone itself. Well, the biggest problem they had was doing the concept justice, because the concept was these big, tall, jagged, rocky spires. And there's really two ways that they could do this in terms of their in-game tools and how they can just make the zone and make the actual level that you play around in. And the first method of doing this is making a prop. Now, if you don't understand what a prop is, that's totally cool, because, well, a prop is essentially a art asset, like a 3D model that is made outside of just messing around with the terrain itself, and then it's imported in and it's kind of dragged on. Now, the great thing about a prop is everyone can be unique and you can spend a lot of time on each prop, but the problem with props is that when you drag them just onto the actual ground itself, sometimes you'll notice it just doesn't really connect that well. If you look at, say, the spires in Blade's Edge Mountains in the Burning Crusade, that was an example of props being used to achieve the concept really well, but when you looked up close, there was just no flow between them. And that's an idea. It's an example of one of the problems that you can really run into using props heavily. Now, things like trees, lampposts, etc. are all props in the game. But the other way they could do these things is by actually using the terrain generator of their game engine, I suppose. I'm not exactly 100% sure on the terminology, though since I'm studying this kind of thing I probably should be. But anyway, what that involves is they basically get a brush, just like a brush in Photoshop or a brush in anything else, and you set your brush to a certain size, and maybe you could set it so that whenever you click your mouse it'll raise up the terrain, and then that makes a little lump, a little hill. And then what they can do is use various other brush tools to kind of sculpt that into a little bit of a better shape. And what's great about using this sort of terrain editor way of doing it is they can iterate a lot. And it's pretty easy to make a different spire every time, because everyone's being handmade in the terrain editor, and it's not like you're sending an artist off to make 100 different props. So that's one of the benefits of using the terrain generator. But the problem is, sometimes it's just a little bit harder to meet the concept. Because at the end of the day, all you're doing is raising the ground up in the game in an interesting manner, rather than using this kind of unique art style. So what happened internally with Blizzard in the creation of this zone is, some people thought it was best to use props, and thus have, I guess, a sort of more crazy aesthetic, but maybe one that wouldn't blend in as well and wouldn't be as nice to work with and design around. But then some people thought, well, we should just do it with the texture editor. Not the texture, the terrain editor, because it allows for more iteration, it allows for, it's easier to make every single one different. And eventually it seems like they've went with using the terrain editor. Now, I actually would agree with that choice. I think that what they've managed to come up with does look quite cool. However, if they were maybe just a little bit taller in some cases than the one that they showed, I think that would be nice. Overall, though, there needs to be a lot of variation, and what this method of doing things allows for is a lot of variation, which is certainly a good thing. So, in the video, just in the background, you'll see them kind of sculpting around it, but you'll also see textures. If you don't know what a texture is, well, it's like the 2D image that's painted onto the ground. If you zoom your camera into first person in game and look at the floor, you'll notice that's just a flat 2D image. And often what they do in games is they make multiple textures like that, and they paint them onto the terrain, and then maybe they blend them a little bit, And if you look at the actual spires themselves, you can see, and you can actually see them being painted in the video, that it's just a whole bunch of textures but blended in, and that's how they achieve that really nice looking shaded effect. It really is interesting playing around with things like the Elder Scrolls Skyrim Creation Kit, which allows for similar things to happen, and CryEngine 3, which is what the Crisis 3 runs off. It really is fun playing around with those tools, and I've done it quite a bit in my own time. But I've got to say, there is definitely, in being an environmental artist, there's this kind of eye that you need to have for how textures and things should blend, and I don't particularly have it, but that's okay, because I don't plan on being an artist. Anyway, so that's just a little bit of a brief overview of how they make the zone. I thought it would be interesting just to talk about that and maybe give you guys some explanations. And actually, you might find this is interesting. They don't show it off too much, but when they're actually making zones in the game, they imagine that they have, say, one of your zones opened, like the map from the Eastern Kingdoms. But they have got like a camera that's basically floating around, completely unshackled wherever they want, and they can basically just, they have a library of props, they have a library of textures and brushes and various things, and they basically just kind of click and drag them on. Now, I'm sure there's maybe some, like, for any parts of the world that actually have to interact with each other, there's scripting and stuff, but just for making the raw things you walk around in, it really is pretty cool. Actually, so yeah, I just thought it would be fun to explain to people a little bit about how games are made in that way. Though, let's talk about the zone itself. I do have some concerns, actually. Concern number one is the art. Well, not the art style. I think the art style is great. It's just the color palette. It is washed out. I think that's what they're going for. They want it to be kind of barren, and I suppose it's going to be partially not equivalent to the Terracore Forest, because I know that one of the other new zones, Talador, also occupies that space, but a part of Terracore Forest was certainly the Spires of Arak. So there's definitely a lot of inspiration there, and of course the Arakoa live there in the Spires of Arak, and actually I think that their architecture and some of the dungeons and things and the screenshots and just the concept art that I've seen for the Arakoa look fantastic. I really love the vibe they're going with there, especially with the Arakoa armor and weapons. It just looks very kind of painful and slicey, which is cool. So yeah, my big problem is I'm not sure that the color palette will be vibrant enough for me to really, really love it on that end. But I think that some of the vertical gameplay that they could maybe have with, going up with the various spires, I think they could make some really cool settlements for the Arakoa on top of the really giant spires in the zone. Though if every single spire was the size of perhaps the one that they showed, I'd be a little bit disappointed, because I do think that while the spires they showed in this Artcraft post are pretty cool, they just don't have that kind of grandiose scale, and I think it would be very cool to have that. Yeah, I just, looking at the aesthetics of all the various zones in Draenor, the Spires of Arak definitely interests me the least. I think what interests me the most would be first Frostfire Ridge, then I'd say Shadowmoon Valley, then Nagrand, because look, I've already been in Nagrand, and I'm probably going to love this new Nagrand, but a part of the charm of the old one was that it was all broken up and stuff. There's that. I think Gorgrond could be pretty cool, I suppose. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing it anyway, but yeah, the Spires of Arak, perhaps not really my favourite. And I guess the Tanaan jungle, I'd put that above the Spires of Arak, but I'm generally not a giant jungle person. Still though, it will be interesting to see Hellfire Peninsula before it turned into Hellfire Peninsula. So yeah, lots of cool stuff. I just thought I'd do a little bit of a video here, just sort of explaining how some game designy things work, because sometimes it's just nice to see behind the veil and understand how things work, and I think it's pretty worthwhile to at least help explain that if I can. Anyway, so that is it for the video. A quick little one, hope you enjoyed it. Just a quick little update for the channel. My coursework stuff is mostly finished, so thankfully the channel will start to get back in a regular schedule. I'm sorry that things have been a little bit weird lately with videos, and not all of them have been that great, honestly, and just stuff, but hey, we're getting back on track. Anyway, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.